guys, this is Chris from Deus Ex Machina, and we're going to do a little new, a post-campaign analysis on the Ultramodern 5 Kickstarter from 2019. Now, most companies won't do this. They won't tell you the inner workings of a campaign or the success or how the money was spent, but in my opinion, backers are like investors, and I think they have the right to know how everything was spent and how the campaign succeeded, especially moving ahead to the Affinity Kickstarter, which is going to be coming sometime in March. Lousy March weather. Anyway, so we're going to go through some details. I'm going to see this full screen, and then we're going to show you guys a couple of other screens, analysis videos about the campaign, and just give you guys an upfront an idea of how the campaign ran and what's going on in the future. So to talk about print quality. Now, this is these are two versions of Ultramodern 5. They have the exact same page count, but this one here is the drive-through RPG version, and this version here is the print version that came from China for the Kickstarter. Now, you'll see that the page counts are different. Sorry, the page quality is different, and that was something that was a surprise. I didn't really understand the difference in quality of the weights, but I didn't know what kind of weight that drive-through RPG uses. They just say color premium. They don't say actually what quality of paper. So I was a bit surprised to see it has a higher quality page quality than the print version. That wasn't what I was intending. But that being said, this is a lot more expensive. It's about $20–30 more, I think, than this version. I may be wrong. That being said, you can get the alternative cover version, which you couldn't do for the Kickstarter, sorry, for the drive-through RPG. And you also get that cool little satin bookmark, which is also not available. Now, when we get to the wonderful looking deluxe version, which I'll remove properly, it is the same quality, if not maybe even a tad bit thicker than the premium color version. And I think that if you look at the quality of the pages themselves, they are higher quality. The printing is higher quality. I would certainly say I love how glossy the blacks are and how much the illustrations here really stand out, and they really jump out of the page. And of course, once again, that has the bookmark as well. And it was spot UV coating. It has a slipcase. And I was very happy with the way that turned out. Now, some people will note that we had some issues with production quality, and I'll tell you how this works. So we had a distribution warehouse for the original Ultramodern black and white when we did a print run in 2018, and it was done by a company called Studio 2, and Studio 2, when they got their 1,000 books, noted that there were about 50 more than the 1,000, but there were about 12 to 13 ones that were defective. And that's to be expected. When you're printing a large book run, some of them will be defective, but most of the time the receiving company will go through them and make sure that the quality of the books are all good. Quartermaster doesn't do that. They do not look through. They grab the books, put them in their distribution, and they go out. They do not have time to go through all of them, which is unfortunately what happens when about 8 or 9 defective books went out to customers, which I don't really care for. And I think only one or two boxes got damaged in shipping. So in all the situations, we did send out replacements at my cost, and that's just what we do because we want to make sure people are happy. But that was unfortunate. We couldn't filter out those defective books early. There were about 8 or 9 of the regular versions and 1 of the deluxes. The deluxe version was crazy. The cover had been torn off completely and was upside down, which you can clearly tell that happened in China, and they just threw it in there anyway, and that version went out, which is a little disappointing. I will be still going with Togo with Affinity, but Affinity has about a bunch of stretch goals specifically related to page quality. So if we go through all of our stretch goals, the final page quality is actually higher than the deluxe version. So it's going to look fantastic if we get through all of our stretch goals. If we get through a few of them, we'll get enough to really make it worthwhile. But yeah, that was the big surprise when we did the print run. Was just the issues with the few defective books that we had and the difference in quality between these two. So with that out of the way, as I said, we have these books done. We have to talk about the campaign and how it was raised and how the money was raised and what happened. We're looking at the KickTrack page, and this will go through how the campaign worked. Obviously, this is how much we raised in the Kickstarter itself. It was 554% of its goal. We can see through this screen here how it happened, and it's quite dramatic what happened in the last few days. we hit it big, and this is obviously a lot of the initial backers came through, a lot of people, the fans and people that were following me for a while, and I was really impressed on how fast we did. We hit our goal the next day, and then it slouched. We were evening it out pretty straight even. We had a couple high points, probably based off of advertising. But then I sent out another email, mass email through DriveThruRPG. Thankfully, DriveThruRPG allows us to do it if we're promoting a Kickstarter that has to be fulfilled through them, and they do the digital distribution. And that's when we got these big spikes. Like I made more in the last 3 days than I did, as you can see, in the last 2 weeks. It's quite dramatic. So obviously a lot of people were following the campaign. A lot of people were looking to see if we're going to blow through stretch goals. We started blowing through stretch goals, and the rest, obviously we blew through the last stretch goal right about on the second day. And then we were just rocketing up as people were putting in money. It was so impressive, and how much I absolutely loved and appreciated it. Our projections obviously was initially very, very high, and then it was even Steven, and then we spiked at the end. And obviously when we had that initial spike, KickTrack was expecting us to do 300,000. Oh man, I wish we hit 300,000, but we didn't. And very quickly it dropped. And then, of course, as time went on, the estimations. But of course, this is when everything got really interesting. Right here, suddenly it was wrong, and its estimation had to go up with us because we had just a massive spike at the end, which was just so very, very cool. But yeah, like I said, the goal for Affinity is going to be even lower, just because we're starting off on we're just going to keep it lower. We're probably going to start with just a 5,000 goal, and we'll just add more color illustrations and more stretch goals, and we'll try to get to the level, because we're going to publish Affinity basically no matter what. I just want it to be the best it can be, and that's what the Kickstarter primarily is for. So this is the kick track. I can see we're advertising somebody else, and that was how much money we raised. Now we're going into Crowdox, and this is something you guys don't usually see. So I'm showing you actually how the Crowdox works. And this is the Crowdox page for Ultramodern. This is the pledge manager. This is the late pledges. As we can see, we got 73 late pledges, and we imported the 1,100 Kickstarter pledges that we had. So we got quite a few late pledges put in. It's interesting that even to this day, you can see here 93% completed. There's still 7% of people who have not closed their pledge manager from nearly 2 years ago. And, there's a variety of ways this happens. A lot of times the emails get dumped into the spam folder, and we tell people, check your spam folder, read the comments. The issue, of course, is a lot of these late pledges, they don't get the Kickstarter updates like most of the backers do. So they don't see the updates of people saying, please check your spam folder, because I'll see emails from people going, we sent you 12, 13 emails. I personally sent you another additional email. Please close your pledge manager. And you didn't answer because either something has happened, and things you can't predict, and sometimes it gets dumped into the spam folder. And at this point now, it's too late. Ultramodern has been distributed. All the special editions are all done. All the other books are off to cool stuff. It's far too late. And I've heard stories about this. I mean, Jamie Stegmaier once said in his viticulture campaign that 4 years after viticulture closed, he got an email from someone wanting to know where their book was. He checked it. They didn't close their pledge manager. That person was out of luck. And we're moving into Affinity, and Affinity has a lot of pledge levels, from digital black and white to full color box set. And I know there's going to be a lot of people who are not going to understand it. We still have that issue with Naramata, because Naramata has a bunch of new backers that have never done board games before. So we can see here that this is how much the campaign raised total, because this is the additional money that was raised. Now, this is not just additional money from these 73 late pledges. This is the shipping costs. Now, we made honestly made a mistake, but at the time, we hadn't locked down our distribution center through Quartermaster. We didn't sign on Quartermaster until after the campaign closed. That was not a good idea, because we didn't have shipping costs until then. So I want to make sure, now they're going with Quartermaster, we know what the shipping costs are going to be moving on to this new campaign. So thankfully with Affinity, we will have shipping costs up ahead. So some of this is shipping costs. That being said, as it turned out, I vastly undercharged shipping, and this is absolutely true. So I'll be honest and say right now that in total, I charged about $9,000 in shipping for all the backers. So from all these backers here, the total of $9,000 was charged for shipping. Now, I don't see that money. That goes to Quartermaster, and Quartermaster ships it. Quartermaster charged me $15,000. I am not joking. That was the disparage. That was the range between the two. I was quite surprised. It was like 14 or 15, but it was a high number. And I was kind of gobsmacked because I said like nine, I round up. We'll round up and say 10,000 to 15. We're talking $5,000 or $6,000 that I had to pay out of the campaign budget to pay for the additional shipping. That was surprising. Some of that was through resending these defective pledges, so nothing could be said about that. The rest of these are from new pledges and so forth. And that was the total. So whenever people ask me how much the campaign raised, even though the campaign raised 84,000, I say a raise over 100,000 because that's where we hit after everything was said and done. Obviously, when we look at the peak, there's a gigantic peak when the Pledge Manager launched, and then it dropped off, and then we had a spike through emails, and then we closed the Pledge Manager somewhere around August, and everything went accordingly. We can see that the vast majority of the people picked up the Ultramodern print option. We had a whole bunch just do the digital option. We had a few get the illustrated, and then the complete Ultramodern. Now, these two were very unique. You got to have an illustrated illustration, and then the complete gave you all of that as well. These two were pretty nice in the fact that you got to have your own personal illustration, and people have seen that, and so far we've had no problems. Everybody who backed the illustrated that got one of their own custom illustrations put in the book, they've all loved it. Now, am I a fan of all of them? No. And if you see any illustrations that seem a little odd, it was because it was probably a custom illustration. Now, there are some of them I adore. I adore some of these characters because some of these, the backers, their imaginations are so interesting, and they give Nick a lot of freedom. But some people were like, I want this specifically in this pose doing this. And so it was fascinating to do that. And you're like, okay. We won't be doing that in Affinity because only on Ultramodern, which was setting agnostic, Affinity is a very specifically defined setting. So we will not be doing the illustrated option for that one. If we do Amethyst, which we would probably do sometime in 2022, then we might do it, but there would be more restrictions. Like you would have to be a character, race, or class that's presented in the setting. You couldn't just create somebody hibbly-gibbly and then toss in the setting. Because when we give you the option, you will have a name. That name will enter the lore, and we will put more effort into it, but there will be some restrictions. But yeah, so that's where a lot of this money came from here. Vast number of international. Like, that's crazy. 145 domestic, and I do believe domestic isn't US. I think domestic is just Canada. Because in here, international 1094, that has to include America, just because I had most of my backers were in America, so that's obviously how that's broken down. So yeah, so we can see how that worked. Now we're going to cut back to the main screen. Okay, so that was the money raised. Now of that, we always have to take into account how much Kickstarter takes. Kickstarter took about 8%, or I think it brought the 84,000 down to 75 or 76,000. So there was a big chunk that they took. Then Crowdox took their own chunk as well, so there was a couple thousand that they took. In all, I would say once we take into account those bills and so forth, the 110,000 that the claim I raised, I maybe saw 90 of that, give or take. And then, as I said, 15 of that later was eaten up by shipping. There was the production cost from them. In total, the print run, we had about 800 of the regulars, about 150 of the deluxes, and I think another 150 of the alts, about 1,000 titles total. That cost about 12,000, I think it was 13,000 to get printed. In case you're doing the math on that, and by the way, everything I'm saying is Canadian. Yes, the printing and shipping of the games to Florida cost less than it cost Florida to ship to backers. That seems like an insane number, but it's absolutely true. It costs more to ship the games from Florida across the world to all the individual backers than it cost me to make the game in the first place. That's nuts. From a production standpoint, the basic and the alt versions had a production cost because the quality is smaller and the print run was larger. It had a production cost of about $5-6 a book. That's normal, right? And then, of course, that's not including the additional costs that have to be folded in for shipping, for distribution, and of course, I have to make money because it'll hit retail, and retail is usually 50% off. So again, that's being sold for $80. Generally costs them 40, which means my profit margin is between that $5 and that 40, but once again, it's more like 20 to 10 to 40. The deluxe version cost quite a bit more. It was about $11 a book. We've already gotten cost for Affinity, so we know where we're going into it. We have two numbers. One is the extremely high number if we blow through all of our stretch goals, and then one that's lower number, so we have an idea what we're shooting for. The advertising budget was also high. In total, I think we spent about $8,000 on advertising, and they say you should spend about 10% of what you think you'll earn. And that's true if you have that inertia. So it was primarily Facebook. There were some other drop-in ads and so forth. I went hardcore in Facebook just because they are the cheapest bang for a buck. I tried Twitter for a little bit and realized that was a waste of time. So it was primarily Facebook, which also includes Instagram. In total, we're looking about $8,000. Unlike a role-playing, unlike a tabletop, a board game, you don't have as many preview guys. And because of the coverage of Ultramodern, we're hoping with Affinity that we will have some people to do some previews on those. And that'll, once again, depend on the timetable. I'm hoping to get some previews for Affinity for the Kickstarter, and that's something I'm going to be working on right now, actually. And so that was advertising. So that, once again, that gets cut from that money we raised. And then it falls down to how much we spent making the game. Now I'm not talking about printing. We just talked about that. I'm talking about the internals and so forth. Now, I don't take a wage for myself. I figure out what kind of profit margin I have with whatever's left over after I spend. So I don't cut myself a wage, and I handle all the writing and I handle all of the layout. I do my own layout and do that to cut costs. And I'm an idiot. I use Publisher, which means nobody else can work on my project because everyone else uses InDesign. And I refuse to give Adobe that much money. They already got my money for Adobe Acrobat Creator, and that was expensive enough as it is. I am not spending $50 a month to get the suite when I only want one program. Anyway, that's a rant. That's over. And then it comes to Nick. Now, Nick was, whenever I write a creative project, both with Amethyst and Ultramodern, any delays that we had were entirely focused in Nick's artwork, and that's absolutely true. Knowing how long it took Nick to create all this new color artwork gave me enough time to write the additional content, which is the reason why we got to add so much content. But the reason why projects take as long as they do is that it takes a while. And I'm not saying Nick is slow. Nick is actually surprisingly fast, but it takes a while to create a quality image as he does. And he's doing all of Affinity, and he's doing all the Affinity from scratch like Ultramodern, and there's 3 books in total larger than Ultramodern. What's interesting, ironically, is that I have all the writing for Affinity done except for stuff that could be unlocked in the stretch goals, which means if they run the campaign in March, it ends in April, I'll have all the writing done by May, which means any delays from printing will just be us waiting for artwork. And I don't mind waiting for artwork, and I'm hoping you guys won't mind for artwork as well. But that art budget, I want to say it's close to $10,000, maybe 15 if you convert to Canadian. So that was a large chunk of money. It was a lot of money to pay for that artwork, and there were additionals. That's probably more expensive than that. That's why I married my bookkeeper so she can keep track of the stuff. So in total, we are looking at nearly, I would say, maybe $50,000 to $60,000 was spent to make the Kickstarter. So if you guys at home running your own campaigns, you can look at that and see, did I get to pocket $110,000? Not even close. I mean, and this campaign was my job. I did not have a day job, so any leftover money was basically the money I used to live. And a lot of guys get bent out of shape with that. They think that any money you should make from Kickstarter should be put into the company, but part of that company is you, and you are an employee. And if you're running a campaign, and if you're your own boss, you need to make sure you're making money. Now, in Naramata, and I won't go into Naramata as a post-analysis because this is Ultramodern, it didn't make that much money. So the people getting paid the most are all the people making the game, except for me. I will not be taking much money or much money at all from Naramata. Thankfully, drive-through RPG sales have been strong because obviously Ultramodern 5 came out. So I'm good. I'm good for the next few months. And if Affinity does well, then I'll keep doing this and hopefully launch Amethyst down the road. So yeah, that's basically how the costs break down. It definitely cost more than I thought, which means I'm happy that it made as much as it did. I definitely made a bit of a mistake on shipping. So I will probably make that mistake again because I really don't like charging people too much on shipping. But I have to be honest that I don't want to lose, another $10,000 again on shipping. But, I'd rather eat that extra cost and then pass the savings on to backers than have backers saddled with a gigantic bill in shipping. No one likes a big bill for shipping. There's no way around that because obviously everything gets distributed out of Florida. So if you're in America, shipping is dirt cheap. Canada, pretty cheap. If you're a backer in Malaysia though, you are paying a lot. I mean, probably as much for the product than it is for shipping. So yeah, that was the Ultramodern 5 post analysis. How much money was made, where that money was put into. Like I said, it's Nick and my show. We didn't have any other people. Nick did the cover this time. Usually a guy named Josh Ratzik does the covers for my previous books. Nick did the cover this time. And I do my own layout. Also, Chris Stilson. Chris Stilson is my editor. He does the editing of all my books. Funny story, of course. I mentioned this a couple of times. That he was a critic of mine on RPG Net when the 4th edition Amethyst Foundations came out. He was commenting at the mistakes I made, so I hired him. I told him, well, why don't you help me with the next project and make it the best it can be? And I like having an editor that knows the rules. And of course, Stilson has created his own content. He is the guy who created the Savage Worlds Fate Core versions of Amethyst. So whenever someone asks me a Savage World or a Fate Core question, I pass it on to Chris because I've never played those. I designed the 13th Age, 4th edition, 5th edition, and Pathfinder versions. And no, Affinity will not be offered in any other system because it's a nightmare converting. If it was up to me, I was making money equally on all of them, I would publish for 13th Age, and I would publish for 5th edition, and I would still publish for 4th edition. I would not touch Pathfinder. It is too much of a nightmare to write for. I understand the value of the system, and I appreciate it for what it is. Obviously, I played 3.5, 3.0, which is so much like Pathfinder, but as a writer, it's a nightmare to write for. And of course, I have no experience with Savage Worlds of Fate Core, so I can't see anything else to that regard. Writing for 4th edition was fun. It definitely made the book so much bigger. The complete Amethyst 4th edition book is the largest of all the core books because of all the rules that are in there. So that's going off topic. So this is all our recap of Ultramodern 5. The next video talking about Kickstarter is going to be talking about what we're going to be expecting with Affinity. I'm going to be handling Affinity a lot more long term. We're going to probably post a campaign and leave it up for a good 2 or 3 weeks before it goes live. I want to make sure everyone knows what we're going into it and to clarify any confusion people might have. So this is Chris from Deus Ex Machina, and I will see you all guys later.